Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Z. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in transgender care. Welcome to my channel, and welcome to the reshoot of video on cross-dressing behavior, how it relates to transgender identity, how it relates to gender dysphoria, and also how it relates to sexual arousal. I did this video last week. A lot of you have seen already this video. I am reshooting this video and took the other video down because I noticed that some of you felt confused by the last point in the video. Now, some of you asked me to specify specifically what other people disagreed on. It wasn't a matter of disagreement. It was a matter of confusion. And clarity is incredibly important for me on this channel. The whole key of this channel is clarity and information, and especially on this topic, because this is a very mega topic. It's a mega topic because it tends to be a topic that breeds a lot of confusion and misinformation for transgender individuals. It's also a topic that tends to be often abused and used against transgender individuals in order to dehumanize them and strip them of their human rights. For that reason, clarity becomes even that much more important when making this video. Additionally, having said that, disagreements with me are always fine. I have to acknowledge, and it's very important for me to acknowledge, that I have a perspective on gender dysphoria and perspective on the formation of trans identity based solely on my experience. And my experience is also limited in the sense of the population that I work with, also their social economic status, as well as geographic location where I practice at. As a result, my information is still going to be limited because there are so many ways and so many variations of gender dysphoria, how it manifests and how it affects individuals. For that reason, for any content creator should absolutely, in my opinion, always read and engage in comment section, because nobody wants to be in echo chamber. To say that one is an expert in a field, to me, is an idiocy. There's no such thing. However, there is such a thing as being more specialized than other individuals in the same field, and I consider myself one of those individuals, giving the trajectory of my career, the years I spent in the field, and the exposure I had to individuals struggling solely with gender dysphoria. So having said that, it's always important and I appreciate the viewers who express the confusion. I appreciate one viewer that graciously also shared more in detail things that were more confusing to her and where she felt that it could be clearly taken and misunderstood by clinicians to further misdiagnose individuals, which I 100% agree. So what I'm trying to say is, feel free to always comment, to share your feedback to things. This is exactly why I engage with all of you, not only because engagement is important for me with the communities that I work with, but it's also important for me not to be stuck in an echo chamber, because I mean, at that point, to me, that's really bad. So having said that, we are redoing this video, and I hope this is going to have much more clarity, and especially in how I'm going to logically present it. I think it's going to have much more understanding to it. So let's start going. Today we'll be talking about cross-dressing behavior. Now let's start with the word cross-dressing to begin with. Cross-dressing, simply put, implies gender bending through clothing, by utilizing clothing that are not stereotypically in alignment with your gender assigned at birth. A lot of you don't like the word cross-dressing because for a lot of you who are trans-identified, cross-dressing is not a proper term. 100% agree. I also know that a lot of you use the term cross-dressing because of the time period where you grew up in and how the word at that time was used, perhaps. So for you, that's something still that you use. But I totally understand and I agree that cross-dressing is not the word that needs to be used in combination with individuals who are trans and non-binary identified, because what you're doing, you're not cross-dressing, you are expressing who you are, and that's a very different thing. Having said that, I'm going to use the word cross-dressing loosely. I'm also going to use feminizing, masculizing much more often. In my experience, I have witnessed 3 primary patterns of individuals that will engage in this behavior. And I have seen different set of patterns in regards to how the behavior may be also related or not to trans identity and to gender dysphoria. Remember, people can experience gender dysphoria and not be transgender, and I will do a separate video talking about it because it's also a very important topic. These are only 3 groups. The most common that I tend to experience and see. I'm sure there are a lot of other patterns of behavior. If you don't fall into one of these groups, or 2 or all 3 of these groups, and you feel like the pattern of your behavior was something else, share in a comment below. This is why it's so important, because that's why we can all learn from each other. But this is the 3 most common, and chances are a lot of them are going to overlap for you. It's not just going to be that you feel like, oh, group 1 speaks to me. It could be that group 1 and 2, group 1 and 3, and there might be an overlap, because we're talking about behaviors that is so not only in so many respects to a lot of people tied to their identity, but also tied to expression of who they are, and also tied to sexuality. For that reason, this behavior is very essential to a lot of individuals, and it is going to show up in different areas and vectors of their life. Having said that, the very first group that I see people tend to pattern-wise fall into in regards to feminizing or masculinizing are individuals who experience gender dysphoria, and who experience gender dysphoria where it actually does stem from core incongruency with the gender assigned at birth, and propels this behavior. This would be individuals who are transgender or non-binary, or fall under the umbrella of that overly shadowing big inclusive words. These individuals may have started feminizing or masculizing at a very young age. And they fall into further 2 little distinctions. Distinction number 1, people started feminizing and masculinizing, and there was 0 sexual arousal as they continued to feminize and masculinize in the adulthood. Sexual arousal was not there. They may have occasionally experienced sexual arousal, but it was not primary. It was almost physiological, almost like a quick snapshot response versus something that's really tied to this behavior. And these are individuals who are feminizing or masculinizing as an extension of who they are. These are individuals who engage in this behavior because when they do feminize or masculinize, they feel at home, they feel at peace with themselves, they feel like they're one, they feel congruency. Some of you even see yourself for the very first time when you engage in feminizing or masculinizing. Some of you even have a hard time seeing yourself for the first time because the dysphoria then increases due to witnessing in a mirror the incongruency you further see between the gender that you want to be as expressed in the clothing and the characteristics, the physical special characteristics of a gender assigned at birth, and becomes even stark comparison and breeds way more dysphoria for you. But nonetheless, all of you engage in this behavior who fall into this category driven by dysphoria stemming from gender incongruency as a way to express yourself. It's a way to express not only yourself, let me clarify even more, but to express your innate, authentic gender identity. For you, this behavior has nothing to do with sexuality, with sexual arousal. In fact, a lot of you, when you do start going on hormones, feel such a relief that you're no longer experiencing sexual arousal, especially for individuals who are assigned male at birth. The relief of not having erections can be tremendous. Not all, but some of you. Also, a lot of you, whereas you may have experienced a little bit of sexual arousal to it that had nothing to do with feminizing and masculinizing, that also tends to go away once you go on hormones. Again, this behavior for you is all about extending yourself. It's almost as if you are externalizing how you feel on the inside, on the outside. Now, remember how I said in this first group, there's two routes, I would say. So this is the first route, 0 sexual arousal. If there's any sexual arousal, it's just coincidental. There is also a vector to this group that may have started to engage in feminizing or masculizing, also maybe at early age or later age. But initially, you started feeling a sexual link to it. It sexually felt good. And because it actually felt good, you continued in this behavior. These individuals, in my experience, are also transgender and non-binary and also have gender dysphoria, but the gender dysphoria is still a little bit dormant, and your sexual relationship and this propensity to enjoy this comes first, and gender dysphoria in relationship to gender awakens second. Let me explain and clarify even more. In my opinion, I think that individuals who sexually get aroused and get a pleasure out of feminizing or masculizing, in my opinion, this is normal and natural. I don't see this as part of paraphilia. I don't see this as taboo. I don't see it as abnormal. I see that this behavior is something that individuals do as consensual adults and as enjoy. I see this, sorry, I have like it's pinning in my neck. I see this as something that is natural and normal and part of one's sexual preference or even sexual orientation. Remember, it is very possible and very common to experience this as a sexual preference and orientation, and at the same time experiencing gender dysphoria and also have transgender identity. For these individuals, I would say it started off with sexual component. And a lot of times what could happen is that sexual component will most likely go away as they went down the road of now realizing they have gender dysphoria and starting to connect to their authentic part of themselves. The more individuals start in line with their gender identity, the sexual component tend to also kind of go away. Regardless of the vector or how it started for individuals, in this first group, individuals always feminized or masculinized, conscious or subconsciously, as an extension of their gender identity, because if you were to say the root propensity out of which the feminizing and masculinizing stems from would be gender dysphoria that is there. Whether the person is fully aware, cognizant of that or not, it could be they could be dormant. They could start feminized and masculinized and say, "Wow, this feels really good," and I'm not sure why it feels relieving, and later realize that, aha, this is congruent with my identity. So this is the first group of individuals. This is probably a very, very common group of individuals that I see. This is why for this set of individuals, the term or word cross-dressing is inaccurate and doesn't really do justice to the behaviors that you engage with, because it is not cross-dressing, it's feminizing or masculinizing. The second group of individuals that I see who tend to engage in this behavior, I would say, is a group of individuals that is the most misunderstood, in my opinion. This is when I tried to speak in the last video, bred confusion, and I can see now why. This is a group of individuals that is often humanized and often branded as nothing more than sexual deviant, which is incredibly inaccurate. In this group of individuals, are individuals who started to feminize or masculinize or cross-dress because of sexual arousal, and because it feels good, and because it felt good, you continue to engage in this behavior. If we were to use labels, the term that people used to describe individuals who enjoy cross-dressing behavior simply for sexual pleasure is used transvestism, a term that is very familiar to all of you. Transvestism has been recently taken, well, not recently, in the 80s, taken by Ray Blanchard and rebranded as now known after gynephilia. If you haven't seen my video on unpacking Ray Blanchard after gynephilia theory, I highly recommend for you to see it to get a clear understanding of the difference between Ray Blanchard after gynephilia theory, which has, in my opinion, nothing to do with this behavior I'm talking right now, and after gynephilia, as Charles Moser, sexologist, and I in agreement with, or transvestism, whichever term you want, they both mean the same thing. Basically, sexual arousal by cross-dressing or feminizing. After gynephilia takes it even further, saying that sexual arousal by propensity of idea of yourself as a woman. These individuals over here have early on feminized or masculinized and experienced sexual arousal. They continued to feminize or masculinize because it felt good. Again, normal and natural. Because you continue to engage in this behavior, you continue to seek pleasure out of it, and it continues to be pleasurable. Again, all normal and all natural. For some individuals in this group, and this is also why this group breaks down into two vectors. The first vector of individuals in this group are individuals who continue all the way into adulthood and all the way into their lives to cross-dress or feminize or masculinize solely for sexual pleasure. It has nothing to do for these individuals in regard to their gender identity. Feminizing and masculinizing is something that they do. They will tell you that, the whole aim of even engaging in this behavior is to seek sexual pleasure, is to seek sexual excitement. The same way as some of us are attracted to certain sexual impulses. For these individuals, the impulse is gender-bending clothing, gender-bending behavior. And these individuals will often say that their core gender identity is stable and strong with their gender assigned at birth. They feel very comfortable in who they are. This is a very important distinction because in this case, the behavior to feminize or masculinize in order to seek sexual pleasure stems from sexual preference versus gender dysphoria rooted in incongruency with gender assigned at birth. Notice the big difference between the group number one that is seeking this behavior because of the dysphoria and in order to feel connected to who you are. This group of people are not doing it in the first vectors. They're not doing it because they need to be connected to who they are. They're doing it because they need to be connected to their sexual preference, which is normal and natural. And this is where, in this group of people, are deeply, deeply misunderstood. Because it's easy for people, especially clinicians, to assume that because you're engaging in this behavior solely for sexual pleasure, you may also not be transgender. Remember, like I said, in group one and in this group two, people can experience this as a sexual preference and at the same time also be transgender, also carry traits of transgender identity. This is why it gets so confusing in this category. It gets very confusing because, and I will explain because, oh my God, I just feel like this is such a misunderstood group of individuals. Some individuals now in a vector one, I described to you a group of individuals who have no gender incongruency, period. And clinicians have to be careful in really fully assessing that there is no incongruencies. In a vector number two, there are a group of individuals for whom this behavior started out as sexual desire, as sexual arousal, as a sexual preference, the cross-dress and feminize and masculinize as a result of sexual pleasure. And later on, they realized that on top of the sexual pleasure, they are also transgender and therefore started experiencing gender dysphoria. I'm very careful here not to say that it's the behaviors that cause gender dysphoria, because I think it's really not so much the behavior, it's more that these people already had transgender identity to begin with, but in the beginning, it became a little colluded with sexual arousal. So it's really, really important to distinguish. This individual group of people who start with sexual arousal but also have transgender identity, for them it can be very difficult to sort out what is what. It can be very difficult for a lot of you who are in this position right now to sort out what is what, because part of you is going to wonder, is it just sexual thing? Is there something more to it? Part of you also may have your gender identity and your dysphoria still in a dormant or repressed state. You also may be in a state of denial. So for that reason, it's also going to be very difficult to sort out what is what. This is why when I work with individuals, and this is what I shared in that video, when I have somebody come to me and they tell me that they only interested in feminizing or feminizing for sexual pleasure, but they start wondering, could they also be transgender, because they're just wondering, well, if I'm engaging in this behavior, could there be more than just sexual component to it? And when I start assessing for gender dysphoria, it's not very clear cut, because the information that they're giving me is information that they themselves even aware up to this point. And that information can be incredibly limited, because if the person is in denial or if the person's gender identity is still dormant, they may be not fully aware of what's going on. This is why it's important not to always necessarily say clear cut, no, for sure you're not transgender, but to say that based on what you're presenting and sharing right now and how you feel in relationship to gender assigned at birth, it sounds more like this might be sexual preference, but it does not mean that later on you may not become more aware and more in touch with your gender identity, which may continue to be gender assigned at birth or maybe transgender. It's important to make this distinction because gender identity and gender dysphoria is complex. Again, I can't say enough how complex it is. It's not a clear-cut black and white point. And it evolves as we are evolving, as we uncover and discover things about ourselves, we uncover and discover our relationship to our gender identity. For this reason, it can be very difficult to distinguish the two. So it's important for any clinician, especially who are listening, to keep that in mind. And unfortunately, we live in a day and age where sometimes we're not able to see our clients for a long duration of time to really dig in. This is why it becomes incredibly important to also let the client know right now, based on what you're sharing, you report feeling very comfortable with your gender assigned at birth and enjoying this behavior for sexual pleasure. Right now, on a surface, it sounds like sexual preference, but it doesn't mean that later on you may not become aware of something else. And to help individuals walk out of the office being mindful and aware and how to pay attention to things in the future in order to get more in touch with who they are. Because things do come up for individuals later in their development, later throughout their lives. Suddenly people start to realize, oh, before this was just sexual for me, now I'm starting to feel and experience dysphoria. What is it telling me? And it's important to also start understanding and linking the dysphoria to primarily the incongruency one feels with their gender assigned at birth. Remember, that is the square one to go back to, is whether you feel incongruency. Now, when I say incongruency, it does not have to be the old cliche, you have to hate your genitals, you have to hate your body. You may feel neutral but uncomfortable with your body without full hatred. So this has to be something that is very, it's a much more complex issue over here, not so clear cut. Anytime a person is still in not full awareness of their gender identity, whether it is gender identity that is fully congruent with their gender assigned at birth or is incongruent, it can be difficult. This is vector 2. Again, vector 2, to go back and to clarify, vector 1 are individuals who engaging in this behavior just because it gives them sexual pleasure and nothing more. And in the end of the day, they can put away clothing and they can tell you, I feel very comfortable being my gender assigned at birth and navigating my life in my gender. And I love engaging in this behavior because it gives me so much sexual pleasure. So this is vector number 1 in group number 2. Vector number 2 in group number 2 are individuals for whom it may absolutely be nothing more than just a sexual behavior, but for whom it also may be behavior in conjunction and combination with their transgender identity, which later will come up and they will turn out to be trans-identified. A lot of times, only time is going to show whether you're working with a good therapist or not. Sometimes time is what's needed for you to get really in touch with who you are. In this group of individuals who enjoy feminizing or masculizing for sexual pleasures, there's also vector number 3. These are individuals who also enjoy feminizing or masculizing solely for sexual pleasure. But because this behavior is such a taboo in our society, these individuals started to carry a lot of shame and guilt. Also, very important to notice that all groups can carry and do carry a lot of shame and guilt, but these individuals are even more so because they have internalized so much of the shame and guilt that as they continue to engage in their behaviors, they get into a cycle of seeking the pleasure because it feels good, getting an orgasm and feel good and confirming to themselves that this behavior feels good. And then afterwards feel tremendous guilt and shame. And then the cycle continues like this. So when the cycle continues like that, it enhances shame and guilt even more. And it also enhances the sexual arousal and linkage to the behavior. These individuals of people are a lot of times may start experiencing dysphoria, may start experiencing confusion. What does it mean for me? And for a lot of these individuals, it may have nothing to do with their gender identity, and it has more to do with shame and guilt and challenges that they face in normalizing this behavior for themselves, in normalizing this is normal and healthy sexual preference and has nothing to do with your gender identity. And then within this group, again, there's also individuals who may experience this behavior in parallel to having transgender identity. This is why it's so complex. This is why this topic requires multi-videos, because it's not so clear-cut. Gender dysphoria is not so clear-cut, where you look at a person and you can do this assessment per DSM, which is, by the way, if you look at it, is a very cookie-cutting assessment and just check the boxes. You have to keep all of this thing in mind. You have to keep in mind how sexuality informs our sense of self. You have to keep in mind how, for some individuals, shame and guilt may play a role. You have to keep in mind how, when people come to you for assessment, how they can still be in denial, how, because they're there for the first time to share with you their history, they may be subconsciously holding back or subconsciously not fully disclosing and withholding information because they're so ashamed of what they're about to share. All of this have to play, and this is why it's so nuanced, and this is why clinicians have to be careful not to be very clear, black and white, but also to keep the possibility open that based on what you're sharing now, it may mean this, but let's keep in mind that we're talking about subjective sense of self that may later come up as something else, and only time will tell. These are the first two groups of people. Now there's a third group and final group of people that I see fall into behavior of feminizing or cross-dressing. A lot of times has no sexual component. It has no sexual component or whatnot. These are just people who like to gender bend. These are people who naturally have personality inclination to enjoy gender bending. This is part of their personality, part of their expression. A lot of times these are people that are very comfortable with their gender assigned at birth. Again, in this group of people also could be individuals who are transgenders themselves. These are individuals who classically we know as drag queens and drag kings and all of the gender bending people. Interestingly, I see tremendous amount of artists and creatives and writers and musicians and painters and actors tend to fall into this category because there's this fascinating thing that I observe. It's almost as if, because the mind is so creative, the mind tends to see gender from the get-go as a more fluid concept versus black and white, right? David Bowie comes to mind versus something that black and white. So these are individuals who again engage in this behavior because they have personality, they just enjoy it. This is just part of who they are, may nothing to do with trans identity, may something to do, as we know, some drag queens and kings are transgender, but not all of them. So these are just people who love gender bend in all shapes and form, including myself included. A lot of times I like to gender bend, so I fall into this category, even though my core identity is very stable. So these are the three most common categories. As you can see, the three are very, very complex. They're not so easy cut. They breed a lot of confusion. And a lot of you watching this, I know, are oftentimes wonder how much of the behavior, if you experience just sexual inclination toward, how much of this is just sexual, how much of this is actually your core identity. Or some people may say, well, if this is my core identity, why am I also occasionally get aroused? It's a very complex issue. And if you're feeling a lot of confusion and if you're not sure, keep in mind that not everything that you're aware of, that you're conscious of, has risen to your consciousness. Remember, 90% remains unconscious. 10% is what we're, so imagine how much down there is still unconscious. So this is not something that a lot of you are going to figure out immediately. This is something that may evolve for you as you go on. For some of you, you immediately hear this video and you say, definitely group number one, it was always extension of who I am. Maybe I occasionally got aroused when I engaged in this behavior. It had nothing to do with sexual arousals. It was always about expressing who I am. Some of you may watch it and say, definitely group number two. For me, this is all about sexual preference. I love it. I enjoy it. And I'm very stable and comfortable with my gender identity at birth. Some of you might say that, yep, I enjoy this as a sexual preference. This is definitely very enjoyable for me. And I'm also transgender. totally valid. Some of you might say, nope, love gender bending behavior, love breaking all the societal norms. I don't even think that gender is black and white, and that's why I engage in this behavior. It's so multifaceted. What's really important to remember here is not to fall prey to assumption, which I hear all the time on Reddit, on all the other subgroups, that, oh, you cross-dressing, you got to be transgender, or you're getting sexually harassed because you're cross-dressing, you're transgender, or if you're getting sexually harassed because you're cross-dressing, you're definitely not transgender. Those are all too simplistic, very reductionistic, and very unfair to use and deeply inaccurate. Remember, your personality and therefore your sense of self in relationship to gender is not always static. For some of us, our core identity is more fixed. For a lot of us, it is more fluid. So what I'm trying to say is that even for me right now, I can only attest to what I feel as my core identity right now. I cannot attest that this is going to be my core identity 20 years from today. So keep that in mind, that things may shift and change. And this is why for a lot of you, it may have started off as a sexual behavior, and later you realize that you're also transgender. Awareness comes and goes in different avenues for all of us. But hopefully I clarified this. Most importantly, I want to clarify this for especially clinicians watching this, and to recognize that this is a much more complex issue as black and white. Gender dysphoria in of itself and diagnosing gender dysphoria is very complex. Again, DSM doesn't do justice to it, and I can see how it's impossible to do justice to it because it's not just a matter of checking off the boxes, right? It's much more complex and deep. And sometimes we have to sit with the client long enough in order to see if there's anything underneath their subconscious that they themselves are not aware of. So hopefully this clarifies. I would love to hear your feedback, especially those of you who've seen the first video, especially those of you who felt the first video was either, the last part was either confusing or was not clearly demonstrated. Comment below, let me know. As I always say, I love listening to your comments. I love hearing what you all have to say. While I may have clinical psychological experience and able to take a lot of your experience and bring it up as a way to conceptualize and logically, objectively look at, it's also very important to say that I'm not versed in every single experience, because that just would be impossible. So it's important to also keep that in mind. So comment below, let me know. I love reading all of your comments, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.